In the untamed frontier town of Copper Ridge, Arizona Territory, some legends are born in whispers, not gunfire. When three drunken drifters decided to harass the quiet new girl at Hawkins' Saloon, they had no idea they were toying with the most dangerous shot in 4 territories. They couldn't have known that Emma Thorne's delicate hands could pull a trigger faster than most men could blink, or that behind her emerald eyes lay the steady gaze of a born marksman. Their mistake would shake not just Copper Ridge, but the very foundations of frontier justice itself. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The setting sun painted long shadows across the weathered boardwalk of Copper Ridge's main street, its dying rays catching the dust that seemed to hang perpetually in the air. Emma Thorne wiped down the bar at Hawkins' Saloon with practiced efficiency, her movements deliberate and controlled. At 24, she'd perfected the art of being forgettable, just another pretty face in a frontier saloon, nothing worth. A second glance, that was exactly how she needed it to be. "Another round, Miss Emma," called Benjamin Hawkins from the end of the bar, his voice carrying the weight of 15 years running the only respectable establishment in Copper Ridge. The old barkeep had taken a chance hiring her 3 months ago, no questions asked, no references required. In Copper Ridge, some questions were better left unasked. Emma's fingers brushed against the hidden holster strapped to her thigh as she reached for a bottle of whiskey, a habit born of necessity rather than nervousness. The weight of her modified. Remington 1875 was as familiar as breathing, though no one in Copper Ridge had ever seen her handle anything more dangerous than a beer mug. The saloon doors swung open, admitting a gust of hot Arizona air and 3 trail-worn men who carried. Trouble like a second skin? Emma's trained eye caught the details others might miss. Gun belts worn low for quick draws, knuckles scarred from too many fights, eyes that held the hard gleam of men who took what they wanted and didn't care who got hurt in the process. "Well, ain't this a sight for sore eyes?" the tallest one drawled, his spurs jingling as he approached the bar. "Didn't expect to find such a pretty little thing all the way out here in Copper Ridge." He wore his gun tied down, bounty hunter style, and a silver star gleamed on his vest, but something about it seemed off to Emma's practiced eye. "Welcome to Hawkins' Saloon, gentlemen," Emma replied, her voice carefully modulated to hide any trace of her Kentucky upbringing. "What can I get you?" "Name's Wade Fletcher," the tall one said, tipping his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "These here are my deputies, and we've had ourselves a long ride tracking some mighty dangerous folks." Emma's mind flashed to the wanted poster she'd seen that morning. 3 men wearing fake badges running a protection racket across the territory. The descriptions matched perfectly, right down to the distinctive scar on Fletcher's left hand. But Emma Thorne, saloon girl, wouldn't know anything about that. "Whiskey all around then?" she asked, reaching for glasses with hands that had put bullets through playing cards at 50 paces. "Ain't you gonna ask what brings lawmen such as ourselves to this fine establishment?" Fletcher's smile didn't reach his eyes as he leaned. "Across the bar, invading her space. Folks' business is their own, in Copper Ridge," Benjamin Hawkins interrupted, moving closer. "Emma, why don't you go check our stock in the back?" "Oh, she ain't going nowhere." Fletcher's hand shot out, grabbing Emma's wrist. "Me and the lady here are just getting acquainted." The moment stretched like molasses in winter. Emma felt the familiar calm settling over her, the same stillness that preceded every perfect shot she'd ever made. One sharp movement, and she could have her Remington clearing leather before any of them could react. But that would mean revealing herself, burning another identity, running again. "I suggest you let go of the lady's hand." A new voice cut through the tension. William Hayes, the town blacksmith, stood from his usual corner table. Hayes was a mountain of a man, his arms thick from years at the forge, but Emma knew his intervention would only make things worse. Well now, Fletcher's grin turned predatory as he released Emma's wrist. Looks like we got ourselves a hero. His hand dropped to his gun belt. No trouble now, Hawkins warned. But Emma saw Fletcher's partners spreading out, taking firing positions. They'd done this before, provoke a confrontation, kill anyone who resisted, then claim self-defense behind their false badges. Emma moved carefully behind the bar, measuring distances, noting angles. Remington pressed against her thigh like a promise. 3 months of peace in Copper Ridge, 3 months of being just another saloon girl, was about to end. Unless... Mr. Hayes, she called softly, letting a tremor enter her voice. Please don't. These are lawmen. Hayes hesitated, torn between chivalry and common sense. Emma saw Fletcher's fingers twitching near his revolver, eager for an excuse. Smart girl, Fletcher smirked. Now, about that whiskey, and maybe later you can show us some real hospitality. Emma reached below the bar where Hawkins kept a shotgun for emergencies. But her fingers found something else, a small bell used to signal the last call. A plan formed, desperate but possible. Of course, she smiled, fingers closing around the bell. But first a toast. To the fine men of the law. In one smooth motion she rang the bell hard and dropped behind the bar. The sharp, unexpected sound made Fletcher and his men instinctively look toward it, just as William Hayes upended his heavy oak table for cover. The distraction lasted less than a second, but in that moment Emma saw everything with crystal clarity. Hayes diving for protection, Hawkins reaching for his shotgun, Fletcher and his men startled but recovering quickly. None of them noticed Emma's hand sliding beneath her skirt, or the way she measured the angles of the mounted mirrors. Behind the bar she had a choice to make. Keep her secret and watch good people die, or reveal herself and lose everything she'd built here. But then Emma Thorne had always known some choices were really no choice at all. Thunder was about to roll through Copper Ridge, and it wasn't. Coming from the clear Arizona sky. What happened next would be told, and retold in saloons across 3 territories, though few would believe the true version. Fletcher's hand moved to his gun, fast as a striking snake. But Emma Thorne had been shooting since she could walk, trained by her father, Major James Thorne of the 7th Cavalry, until she could hit a dime at 100 paces. More importantly, she'd learned to read men, to see the tension in their shoulders before they drew, to recognize the subtle shift of weight that preceded violence. She didn't go for her Remington. Not yet. Instead, she used the mirrors, watching the reflections of Fletcher's men as they prepared to shoot Hayes. Her mind calculated angles with the precision of a mathematics professor, seeing not just what was, but what would be. Last chance. Gentlemen, she said softly, letting her carefully cultivated accent slip just enough to reveal steel beneath the silk. Walk away. Fletcher laughed, the sound ugly with anticipation. Oh, sweetheart, you got no idea what's coming. But he was wrong. Emma knew exactly what was coming. She'd seen it in a dozen towns before Copper Ridge, men like Fletcher destroying lives with false badges and gun smoke, taking whatever they wanted because no one could stop them. She'd been running from town to town, hiding who she really was, but something about Copper Ridge had touched her heart. Maybe it was old Benjamin Hawkins' kindness, or the way the town had welcomed her without prying. Or maybe she was just tired of running. Actually, Emma's voice changed, becoming the voice that had once commanded attention at shooting exhibitions back east before everything went wrong. I do. Her right hand stayed visible on the bar, but her left moved with deliberate grace to the locket at her throat, the last gift from her father before he died. Inside wasn't a picture, but a key to a lockbox buried behind Hawkins' saloon, containing proof of who she really was. After tonight, she'd need to dig it up and move. On the weight of that knowledge settled over her like a familiar blanket. Copper Ridge had been good to her and had given her 3 months of peace. Now she would give something back. Fletcher's trigger finger twitched. Emma saw it in the mirror, saw his partner tensing, saw Hayes about to die trying to protect someone who didn't need protection at all. A bead of sweat rolled down Fletcher's temple. The setting sun caught the false badge on his chest, and Emma Thorne, daughter of a cavalry officer, the finest shot west of the Mississippi, made her decision. Some secrets were worth keeping, some weren't worth the cost. "Tell me, Mr. Fletcher," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent saloon, "did you earn that badge? Or did you take it off a real lawman's corpse after you killed him?" The question hit him like a physical blow. His eyes widened, recognition and fear warring in them, as her accent shifted fully to the cultured tones of Kentucky society. He started. Emma smiled, and it was the smile that had graced wanted posters from St. Louis to San Francisco, though always with a man's name beneath it. The smile of someone who had brought down some of the worst criminals in the territories, only to be branded an outlaw herself when she refused to stop hunting corrupt lawmen. "The one who's been hunting badge thieves across 3 territories?" she finished for him. "The one who left your former partner Carson tied to his own horse. In Tombstone, the one they call the ghost shooter because no one's ever seen my face." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The revelation hung in the air like gun smoke. Emma's fingers traced patterns on the bar. Top, but her eyes never left the mirrors, watching angles, measuring distances, preparing for what had to come next. "I suggest," she said softly, letting ice creep into her voice, "that you consider your next move very carefully, because this town, these people, they're under my protection now." Outside, a hot wind stirred the dust of Copper Ridge's main street. Inside Hawkins's saloon, the world balanced on a knife's edge, waiting to see what Fletcher would choose. And Emma Thorne, no longer just a saloon girl, prepared to show these men exactly why some legends are born in whispers, not gunfire. Fletcher's laugh shattered the tension, but it carried an edge of desperation. "Boys, seems our little saloon girl's been reading too many dime novels." His hand stayed near his gun, but Emma noticed how his partners shifted uneasily, recognizing something dangerous in her stance. "Dime novels?" Emma's smile never wavered. "Tell that to Jack Morrison's gang. Oh, wait, you can't. They're all serving 20 years in Yuma Territorial Prison." She turned slightly, letting the setting sun through the window catch her face. "Recognition finally hitting you, Fletcher. I was wearing a different hat when I took down Morrison, but the eyes are the same." The color drained from Fletcher's face. 8 months ago, the notorious Morrison gang had been found hogtied outside Yuma's gates, each man with a perfect shot through their shooting hand. The only clue to their captor's identity had been a witness, description of ice-green eyes. "That was a man," Fletcher's voice cracked slightly. "The papers all said, papers print what they're told." Emma cut him off. "Amazing what a few bound breasts and the right hat can do. Now, about that badge you're wearing, I believe it belonged to Marshal Daniel Cooper of Prescott. Fine man. Didn't deserve what your gang did to him." Behind her, Emma heard Benjamin Hawkins curse softly. The murder of Marshal Cooper had shocked the territory, but the killers had never been caught. Until now. "You don't know what you're talking about," Fletcher snarled, but his eyes darted to the doors, measuring escape routes. "Quarter-inch nick on the star's right point," Emma continued relentlessly. "Slight discoloration on the back, where acid touched it during the forging process. Cooper showed me that badge once and told me its history, right before your men ambushed him on the Prescott Road." William Hayes had moved away from his overturned table, understanding now that he wasn't protecting Emma. He was witnessing something extraordinary. The blacksmith's hands were steady on his rifle, covering Fletcher's partners as they backed toward the door. "Even if you're who you say," Fletcher's voice turned oily, reasonable, "you're just one woman. We've got friends, powerful friends, the kind that makes problems disappear." Like Judge Matthews in Prescott? Emma's words fell like hammer blows. The one who dismissed every case against your gang? Funny thing about corrupt judges, they keep excellent records. Insurance, they call it. Marshal Cooper found those records the day before you killed him. Fletcher's eyes widened. You're bluffing. The lockbox buried out back says differently. Everything Cooper discovered, everything Judge Matthews wrote down, names, dates, bribes paid. Enough to hang 30 men, including some very respectable citizens of Prescott. The saloon had gone deathly quiet. Even the usual afternoon drinkers seemed frozen, witnessing history being made in whispers and revelations. That's why you're here, isn't it? Emma's voice carried to every corner. Cooper hid his evidence somewhere in Copper Ridge. You've been searching towns all along the stage route, shaking them down one by one, but you never expected the evidence to find you. Fletcher's face twisted with rage and fear. "Kill her!" he screamed, his gun clearing leather. What happened next became an instant legend in Copper Ridge. Later, witnesses would swear they never saw Emma move. One moment she was behind the bar, the next 3 shots rang out in such rapid succession. They sounded like a single crack of thunder. Fletcher's gun went spinning, a perfect hole drilled through the cylinder. His partner's weapons followed, each shot placed with surgical precision to disable the firearms without harming the men. Emma stood in plain sight, her Remington finally revealed, smoke curling from its barrel. "That was a warning," she said. Softly, "The next 3 go through your shooting hands. Your choice." "You can't prove anything," Fletcher spat, cradling his stinging fingers. "Actually, she can," a new voice announced from the doorway. Sheriff Thomas Richardson of Copper Ridge stepped into the saloon, followed by 2 deputies. "While you boys were busy threatening my town, we've been digging up a very interesting box behind the saloon." Emma's eyes never left Fletcher as Richardson approached, carrying a mud-stained strongbox, found right where Miss Thorne said it would be, along with a letter from Marshal Cooper himself, explaining everything. "You knew?" Emma asked quietly, speaking to Richardson for the first time since arriving in Copper Ridge. The sheriff smiled grimly. "Daniel Cooper was my friend. When he died, he managed to get a message to me. Said to watch for someone with eyes like green ice. Said they'd bring justice when the law couldn't reach high enough." He paused. "Never expected it to be the quiet girl serving drinks in my town." Fletcher lunged suddenly, not for a weapon, but for the door. He made it 2 steps before Emma's next shot took his hat off, the bullet parting his hair so close it left a burning line across his scalp. "That's 5 shots," Emma announced to the room. "My Remington holds 6. Anyone else feeling lucky?" The fight went out of Fletcher and his men. As Richardson's deputies began making arrests, Emma finally lowered her weapon. The setting sun painted the saloon in shades of gold and shadow, but the real darkness was lifting from Copper Ridge. "Quite a show," Benjamin Hawkins said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "Suppose you'll be moving on now." Emma started to nod, then paused. For 3 months, she'd found something in Copper Ridge she'd thought was lost forever, a home. Looking around the saloon, she saw not fear or judgment in the faces watching her, but something like pride. "That depends," she said slowly, "on whether you still need a saloon girl who's handy with a Remington." Hawkins laughed. "Way I see it, that's exactly what this town's been needing." Sheriff Richardson agreed. "Cooper's evidence will shake things up in Prescott. Change is coming to the territories. Maybe it's time the law had someone watching its blind side." Emma felt the weight of the past 3 years, the running, the hiding, the endless hunt for justice, begin to lift. Here in this dusty saloon, with the truth finally revealed, she'd found not just a haven but a purpose. "Well then," she smiled, holstering her Remington but leaving it visible on her hip, "I believe these gentlemen were asking for whiskey." As she moved behind the bar, Emma Thorne, saloon girl, marksman, legend in the making, felt a new chapter beginning. The ghost shooter had been a shadow, justice delivered in darkness. But here in Copper Ridge, Perhaps it was time for justice to step into the light. Outside, the Arizona sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in colors of fire and promise. Inside Hawkins's saloon, a new story was just beginning. One that would be told in saloons and around campfires for generations to come. Not all legends are born in gunfire and blood. Sometimes they're born in the quiet moments when someone decides to stop running and take a stand. Fletcher and his men were led away to face frontier justice, but Emma knew their arrest was just the beginning. The evidence in Cooper's strongbox would reach far beyond Copper Ridge, touching powerful men who thought themselves untouchable. The storm she'd started would reshape the territories, but the night wasn't over yet. As Richardson's deputies led Fletcher and his men toward the jail, a commotion erupted outside. Hoofbeats thundered down Copper Ridge's main street. Reinforcements Fletcher had stationed nearby, drawn by the sound of gunfire. 8 riders, Emma announced calmly, reading the situation through the saloon's windows. Heavy weapons. They're not here to make arrests. Sheriff Richardson's face hardened. My deputies are exposed out there with the prisoners. Emma was already moving, her skirts swishing as she headed for the door. Mr. Hawkins, that Winchester is still under the bar? Never failed me yet, the old barkeep replied, producing the rifle. Mr. Hayes, Emma turned to the blacksmith, how's your aim with that scattergun? The big man chambered a shell in response. Just point me where you need me. Emma smiled, feeling the familiar calm of combat settling over her. Cover the deputies. Get Fletcher and his men secured. I'll handle their friends. Alone? Richardson demanded. That's suicide! No! Emma's voice carried the quiet confidence of absolute certainty. That's mathematics. She stepped onto the boardwalk just as the riders rounded the corner, their guns already drawn. In the fading light, they made perfect silhouettes against the sunset. Emma's mind calculated angles, distances, trajectories, just as her father had taught her years ago. Gentlemen, she called out, her voice carrying clearly. I believe you're looking for Wade Fletcher. I'm afraid he's indisposed at the moment, having a rather pointed discussion about the proper ownership of certain badges. The lead rider pulled up short, taking in the scene. The lone woman standing calmly before Hawkins' saloon, Fletcher and his men being led away in irons. Lady, you don't want to be involved in this, he warned. Walk away now. We'll forget. We saw you. Emma's laugh was soft but carried steel. Interesting choice of words. That's exactly what Marshal Cooper's killer said, right before I put him in Yuma prison. She let her accent slip fully into the cultured tones that had become infamous across 3 territories. Though he knew me by a different name. The recognition that swept through the riders was almost physical. One of them actually crossed himself. The ghost shooter, someone whispered. Can't be, another argued. Ghost shooter's a man. Wrong on both counts, Emma replied pleasantly. I'm very real and very much not a man. Now you have exactly 10 seconds to turn those horses around, or I start demonstrating why they call me a ghost. The lead rider's gun hand twitched. Emma's, Remington cleared leather so fast it seemed to materialize in her hand. That's 1 second gone, she announced. Care to test if the stories about my speed are exaggerated? 9 heavily armed men faced a single woman on a dusty street in a frontier town. But something in her stance, in the absolute stillness of her gun hand, made them hesitate. 8 seconds, Emma continued conversationally. Did you know a human? I can only track movement above a certain speed. That's why no one ever sees my draw. They just hear the shot and find themselves disarmed. She smiled. Or dead, depending on my mood. The lead rider's horse shifted nervously, sensing its riders. Tension. 5 seconds. Something else interesting about human perception. In a group this size, no one ever expects to be the first target. Each man assumes I'll aim for someone else. That mathematical uncertainty? It's why your trigger fingers are All just a little too slow right now. Behind her, Emma heard Richardson and his deputies securing Fletcher. Her goal was accomplished. She just needed to hold the rider's attention a few moments longer. 2 seconds. Last chance to ride away. With your guns intact and your hands still able to hold them. The lead rider's face twisted in rage. "Shoot this bit!" The word died in his throat as 9 shots rang out in less than 2 seconds. When the echo faded, 9 guns lay in the dust, each with a perfect hole through its cylinder. Emma's Remington had somehow already disappeared back into its holster. "Time's up," she said softly. The riders stared at their ruined weapons, then at the woman who had just demonstrated shooting skills that bordered on supernatural. Without another word, they wheeled their horses and galloped away, leaving their hay. Guns in the street. Emma turned to find the entire town watching from windows and doorways. In the jail, Fletcher and his men would soon be writing confessions, eager to bargain before Judge Matthews' papers came to light. But it was the faces of the townspeople that caught her attention. Not fear or suspicion, but something like awe. Sheriff Richardson approached, shaking his head in wonderment. 9 shots in under 2 seconds. Never seen anything like it. 10 shots, actually, Emma corrected. Check Fletcher's right boot. He was going for a derringer. She walked back into Hawkins' saloon, where the regulars had returned to their drinks as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But something had changed, in the way they looked at her, in the way they held themselves. Copper Ridge had just witnessed the birth of a legend, but more importantly, they'd gained a protector. Benjamin Hawkins was waiting behind the bar, a shot of his finest whiskey poured and waiting. 10 perfect shots in 2 seconds, he mused. Want to tell me how that's possible? Emma picked up the glass, studying the amber liquid. My father used to say there are 3 kinds of speed: the speed of the hand, the speed of the eye, and the speed of thought. Master all 3, and time itself becomes your ally. She downed the whiskey in one smooth motion. Besides, she added, with a slight smile, who says I aimed between shots? Real speed comes from knowing where your target will be before they do. The night settled over Copper Ridge like a comfortable blanket. In the jail, Fletcher and his men contemplated their future. In saloons across the territory, the story was already spreading. But here in Hawkins' saloon, Emma Thorne had finally found something worth protecting, not just a town, but a future where justice didn't have to hide in the shadows. She still had drinks to serve and a town to protect. After all, the best legends are the ones that grow naturally, fed by truth and nurtured by time. And Emma Thorne had all the time in the world to become exactly what Copper Ridge needed. A guardian who moved between 2 worlds, as comfortable with a gun as with a whiskey bottle, keeping watch over the thin line between justice and vengeance. Dawn broke over Copper Ridge like a whispered warning. Emma stood at her window above Hawkins' saloon, watching the town come alive while methodically cleaning her Remington. The morning stage would be arriving soon, carrying more than just mail and passengers. News travelled fast in the territories, and she knew Fletcher's arrest would draw attention from Prescott's power brokers. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in, Sheriff," she called, not looking up from her work. Richardson entered, looking impressed despite himself. "How'd you know it was me?" "Boot steps. You favor your left leg slightly. Old injury from the war between the states, I'm guessing." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "You really are as good as they say." "Better," Emma replied without pride, just stating facts. "Fletcher talked yet?" "All night long. Man's scared half to death of what's in that strongbox." Richardson pulled up a chair. "Judge Matthews' records are comprehensive. Names, dates, payoffs, goes all the way up to the territorial governor's office." Emma nodded, reassembling her weapon with practiced ease. That's why they killed Cooper. He wasn't just breaking up their protection racket. He was going to expose everyone behind it, including Sebastian Montgomery. The name hung in the air like gun smoke. Sebastian Montgomery was the richest man in the Arizona Territory, owner of the largest silver mine in Prescott. His word was law in territorial politics, his influence reaching all the way to Washington. Cooper's evidence ties him directly to 3 murders, Richardson continued, plus land theft, claim jumping, witness intimidation. And he'll be here by noon, Emma finished. Stage from Prescott's due at 11. Montgomery won't trust underlings. With this, he'll come himself, probably with that pet gunslinger of his. Marcus Cole. Richardson's face darkened. Fastest draw in the territory, they say. Emma's hands stilled on her weapon. Second fastest. You've met. Once. 2 years ago in Santa Fe. He was working for the Sutton gang then. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. He still walks with a limp. The sheriff studied her for a long moment. How many others? How many times have you stopped men like this? Enough to know the pattern. Montgomery will arrive playing the concerned citizen, all proper authority and legal proceedings. Cole will be watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. They'll try to discredit the evidence, pressure witnesses, pull strings with territorial officials. Emma checked her gun's action. And when that fails, they'll burn Copper Ridge to the ground rather than let those papers see daylight. Town's with you, Richardson said firmly. After last night, people understand what's at stake. Emma shook her head. Can't risk the town. Too many innocent people could get caught in the crossfire. This has to end clean. Montgomery, Cole, and their entire corrupt empire taken down by the law, not bullets. How? We use their own game against them. Emma stood, moving to a battered trunk in the corner. Cooper wasn't just collecting evidence. He was building a case that even corrupted courts couldn't ignore. But he needed one thing to make it stick. She opened the trunk, revealing stacks of documents, telegrams, and photographs. While Fletcher's gang was searching towns, I was following Montgomery's paper trail. Bank records, property deeds, military contracts, everything connecting. Him to Judge Matthews' schemes. Richardson's eyes widened as he examined the evidence. This is enough to hang him 10 times over, but we have to play it smart. Montgomery's too powerful to take down directly. We need to cut off his support first. A commotion in the street drew their attention. A rider was approaching at full gallop, raising dust on the morning air. Right on schedule, Emma murmured. Telegraph operator from the way station, bringing word that Fletcher's gang was arrested. She was already moving, her servant's dress replaced by practical riding clothes, gun belt settled naturally on her hips. Time to set the board, Sheriff. By sunset, Sebastian Montgomery's empire will be in ashes, and he won't be able to blame a single shot fired. The telegraph operator's news spread through Copper Ridge like wildfire. Emma watched from the shadows as worried whispers filled the streets. Montgomery's name passed from lip to lip, carrying fear and resignation. But beneath that fear, she sensed something new, a spark of defiance, kindled by last night's events. Benjamin Hawkins was waiting when she returned to the saloon. Stage will be here soon. Town's getting nervous. Good, Emma replied, checking the hidden pockets in her vest, where she distributed copies of Cooper's evidence. Nervous people make mistakes. Montgomery's used to controlling situations through fear. Today, we turn that fear against him. She'd positioned trusted townspeople at key locations. Hayes at his forge, with a clear view of the stage stop. Doc Wilson's young apprentice ready to ride messages. Even old Mrs. Peterson watching from her dressmaker's shop. Each held a piece of evidence, each ready to move at her signal. Remember, she told Hawkins, when Montgomery arrives, treat him like royalty. Let him think he's in control. And Cole? Leave him to me. He's dangerous, but predictable. Men like him can't resist trying to prove themselves. The morning wore on, tension building with each passing minute. Emma served drinks, played her role, but her mind was calculating angles, not just of shots, but of influence and leverage. She'd learned long ago that some battles are won with whispers instead of bullets. At precisely 11, the stage rolled into Copper Ridge. Sebastian Montgomery stepped down like an emperor surveying his domain. Tall, distinguished, dressed in Eastern fashion that seemed out of place in the dusty frontier town. Marcus Cole followed, moving with the liquid grace of a born killer. Emma felt Cole's eyes sweep the saloon as they entered, knowing he was searching for her, even though they'd never formally met. She kept her movements deliberately clumsy, playing the simple barmaid while watching their reflections in the mirrors. "Mr. Montgomery," Sheriff Richardson approached, radiating carefully crafted nervousness. "We weren't expecting such an honored visitor." Montgomery's smile never reached his eyes. "Merely a concerned citizen, Sheriff. Heard you had some trouble with false accusations against legitimate law officers." Legitimate? Emma couldn't help herself. Like Marshal Cooper was legitimate? Cole's hand dropped to his gun, but Montgomery stopped him with a gesture. "My dear, I don't believe we've been introduced. Emma Thorne." She curtsied slightly, letting her accent slip just enough to make him wonder. "Just a humble saloon girl." "Sir, but Marshal Cooper was a friend to this town. His murder shocked us all." Montgomery's eyes narrowed slightly. "A tragedy indeed, though I believe that case was solved. A bandit attack, as I recall." "Funny thing about bandits," Emma mused, setting a whiskey bottle on their table. "They don't usually leave evidence behind, especially not evidence locked in strongboxes." The threat was clear. Montgomery's smile became a fraction colder. "Miss Thorne, isn't it? You seem unusually well-informed for your position." "Oh, you'd be amazed what people let slip around a simple barmaid. Why, just yesterday, Mr. Fletcher was very informative." Cole shifted in his chair, but Emma's attention was on Montgomery. She saw the calculations behind his eyes, the weighing of options. He would try to solve this quietly first. His reputation demanded it, but violence lurked just beneath the surface, waiting for an excuse. Perfect. The game was on, and Emma Thorne had just made the opening move. By sunset, either justice would prevail, or Copper Ridge would burn. There would be no middle ground. Such dangerous talk for a saloon girl, Montgomery mused, studying her with new interest. "One might almost think you're trying to imply something." Emma poured his whiskey with deliberate grace. "Just sharing local gossip, sir. Though speaking of implications, I heard the most fascinating rumor about property deeds in Prescott. Something about duplicate records." Cole's hand tightened on his gun, but Montgomery's face remained perfectly composed. Only the slight whitening of his knuckles on the glass betrayed his tension. "Property deeds." His voice remained pleasant but carried an edge. "My dear, such matters are hardly suitable for conversation." "The Whitman Ranch?" Emma continued as if he hadn't spoken. "The Sullivan Mine? Or perhaps the Carter Homestead? All such tragic accidents, their owners dying just after refusing to sell." She smiled. "Amazing how the deeds all ended up in your bank's possession, signed and dated before their deaths." Montgomery's mask slipped for just a fraction of a second. Cole started to rise, but his employer's hand shot out, stopping him. "My dear Miss Thorne," Montgomery's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, "you seem to be laboring under some serious misapprehensions. Accusations without proof are merely slander, and slander can be unhealthy." Emma's laugh was genuine. "Proof? Like the duplicate deed books Judge Matthews kept? Or perhaps the letters between you and Fletcher's gang arranging those convenient accidents?" She leaned closer, dropping her voice. "Or maybe the sworn statement from your former secretary, Catherine Wells, detailing exactly how your organization operates." The name hit Montgomery like a physical blow. Catherine Wells had disappeared 6 months ago, allegedly fleeing to California. "After embezzling from Montgomery's mining company, Catherine is dead," he said flatly. "Is she?" Emma's smile was cold. "Strange. I had coffee with her just last week in Tucson. Lovely woman. Excellent memory for details. Very thorough in her record-keeping. Montgomery's composure cracked. Cole, the gunslinger, stood smoothly, but Emma was already moving. "Mr. Hayes," she called out, "would you fetch that special order from the blacksmith shop? The one we discussed?" The big blacksmith appeared in the doorway, carrying a strong box identical to the one containing Cooper's evidence. Montgomery's eyes tracked it like a snake watching prey. "Interesting thing about evidence," Emma continued conversationally. "Smart folks make copies. Lots of copies. Hidden all over the territory. Dead drops that trigger automatically if certain. People don't check in regularly." She paused. "People like Catherine Wells." The saloon had gone deathly quiet. Everyone present knew they were watching a deadly game of chess played with words instead of bullets. "What do you want?" Montgomery's voice was barely audible. "Justice!" Emma's playful demeanor vanished. "Cooper's murderers prosecuted. Your stolen properties returned to their rightful owners. Your pet judge removed from the bench. And you, Mr. Montgomery, retiring quietly to your estate back east, never to darken Arizona territory again. Or by this time tomorrow, every newspaper from here to Washington will have copies of everything. Every murder, every theft, every corrupt deal. Your empire won't just fall. It will become a cautionary tale." Montgomery studied her for a long moment. "You're not just some saloon girl? No, sir. I'm the ghost Cooper called up before you killed him. The one who's been hunting your organization piece by piece. The one they call the ghost shooter," Cole finished, real fear in his voice for the first time. "The one who crippled the Sutton gang." Emma's hand dropped to her Remington. "Care to compare limps, Mr. Cole?" The tension in the saloon could have been cut with a knife. Montgomery's empire teetered on the brink, his reputation and freedom hanging by a thread. And in that moment, Emma saw him make his choice. "Kill her," he snarled. "Kill them all. Burn every piece of evidence, and every person who's seen it." Cole drew, fast as summer lightning, but Emma had been ready since the moment they walked in. Her Remington cleared leather before his gun was halfway up. The shot echoed like thunder in the confined space. Cole's gun went flying, along with 2 fingers from his shooting hand. The legendary gunslinger collapsed, clutching his ruined hand and staring at Emma with disbelief. "That's one copy of the evidence you'll never reach," Emma said quietly. "Want to guess how many others are out there?" Montgomery's face was a mask of rage. "The law is already here," Sheriff Richardson announced from the doorway, backed by a dozen deputies. "Sebastian Montgomery, you're under arrest for the murder of Marshal Daniel Cooper, conspiracy, corruption, and about 30 other charges we'll sort out later." As the deputies moved in, Emma saw the final piece of her plan fall into place. Montgomery had chosen violence, just as she'd expected. Now his arrest would be legitimate, his crimes exposed through proper channels. Justice served by law, not vigilantism. "You've no idea what you've done." Montgomery spat as the handcuffs closed around his wrists. "The forces you're provoking." "Actually," Emma replied, "I do. Your empire's finished, Mr. Montgomery. By nightfall, every corrupt judge, every bought lawman, every crooked politician you own will be running for the hills. The age of men like you is ending." She turned to Benjamin Hawkins as the prisoners were led away. "I believe these gentlemen left without paying for their whiskey," the old barkeep laughed. "On the house, I'd say, though I suspect business is about to pick up considerably once word spreads about how Copper Ridge brought down Sebastian Montgomery." Emma smiled, holstering her Remington. The game was over, the pieces played exactly as she'd planned. But she knew this was just the beginning. Other corrupt empires would rise, other criminals would try to rule through fear and violence, and when they did, they'd find Emma Thorne waiting, a guardian moving between light and shadow, dealing justice, with mind and gun in equal measure. The legend of the ghost shooter was about to evolve into something new, something that would change the very face of the frontier. For now, though, she had a saloon to run and a town to protect. After all, the best legends are the ones that grow, naturally, rooted in truth and justice, nurtured by time and conviction. And Emma Thorne had all the time in the world to become exactly what the frontier needed. A reminder that sometimes the most dangerous force for justice is the one hiding. In plain sight, news of Sebastian Montgomery's arrest sparked a wildfire across the Arizona territory. Within hours, telegraph wires hummed with reports of corrupt officials fleeing, hidden documents surfacing, and long-buried secrets coming to light. But in Hawkins' saloon, Emma Thorne watched a different kind of storm brewing. "Riders coming," William Hayes announced from his post by the window. "Not law, not local." Emma nodded, counting the subtle signs of tension in the blacksmith's stance. Silver Company men, Montgomery's mining partners from back east, right on schedule. 3 days had passed since Montgomery's arrest, and Copper Ridge had transformed. The fear that once haunted its streets had been replaced by a quiet pride, but also a wary readiness. Everyone knew the real fight was just beginning. 4 men in fancy suits, Hayes continued his report, 2 carriages behind them, and about a dozen riders hanging back trying to look casual. "Hired guns," Emma surmised, not looking up from where she was polishing glasses. "Probably Pinkerton men. The mining companies prefer them, gives their violence a veneer of legitimacy." Sheriff Richardson entered the saloon, his expression grim. "Just got word from Prescott. Judge Matthews was found dead in his cell this morning. Suicide, they're calling it." "Convenient," Emma's voice was cold. "Let me guess, before he could testify about his partners back east?" "Stranger still," Richardson added. "Catherine Wells has vanished from protective custody in Tucson. Trails gone cold." Emma's hands stilled on the glass she was polishing. The elaborate web of evidence and witnesses she'd woven around Montgomery was being dismantled thread by thread. She'd expected this, planned for it even. But the speed and efficiency of the response concerned her. "They're trying to clean the house," she mused. "Eliminate anyone who could testify, destroy any evidence that could implicate the bigger fish." She smiled slightly. They have no idea what they're walking into. The saloon doors swung open, admitting a tall man in an immaculate Eastern suit. His companions were equally well dressed, but Emma's trained eye noted the subtle bulges of hidden weapons beneath their fine tailoring. "Good morning," the leader announced to the room at large. "I'm Theodore Pinkerton, representing the Western Silver Consortium. We're here for certain irregularities in recent legal proceedings." Emma dried her hands deliberately. "Meaning, you're here to bury Montgomery's crimes and protect your investors?" Pinkerton's smile didn't waver. "You must be Miss Thorne. Your reputation precedes you." "Just portions of it," Emma replied pleasantly. "The parts that survived anyway." The threat was subtle but clear. Both sides knew what had happened to others who had tried to intimidate her. "My employers are prepared to be generous," Pinkerton continued smoothly. "The consortium understands that certain misunderstandings have occurred. We're prepared to offer compensation to any parties who might have been inconvenienced." Emma's laugh was genuine. "Inconvenienced? Is that what you call murder, theft, and corruption? Allegations without proof, my dear, especially now that Judge Matthews has so tragically passed and Miss Wells seems to have reconsidered her testimony." "Interesting choice of words." Emma moved from behind the bar, her steps measured and deliberate. "Almost identical to the language used in the consortium's letter to Marshal Cooper 2 days before his murder. The one offering to resolve any misunderstandings about his investigation." For the first time, Pinkerton's composure cracked slightly. "I'm not sure what you're implying." "The same letter," Emma continued relentlessly, "proves that the consortium knew about Cooper's murder in advance. The one Catherine Wells kept a copy of, along with receipts for the payments to Fletcher's gang. The evidence that's now in the hands of every major newspaper editor in the territory. One of Pinkerton's companions reached inside his jacket. Emma's voice cracked like a whip. I wouldn't. The man by the forge has a clear shot at your head. The woman in the dressmaker's shop across the street has her rifle trained on your associates outside. And me? She smiled. I can put a bullet through your heart before you clear leather. Pinkerton's eyes narrowed. You're bluffing. The ghost shooter operates alone. I did, Emma agreed, until I found something worth protecting. Now I have an entire town of ghosts at my back. Care to test how many of your men will die before you reach that hidden derringer? The tension stretched like piano wire. Through the windows, Emma could see the hired guns outside shifting nervously, realizing they were covered by unseen rifles. The consortium doesn't take kindly to threats, Pinkerton said softly. This isn't a threat, Emma replied. It's a lesson in mathematics. How many men are you willing to lose? How much exposure can your investors tolerate? Because right now, Cooper's evidence is the only thing keeping you alive. Meaning if anything happens to me or anyone in Copper Ridge, every piece of evidence goes public. Your investors lose everything. The consortium becomes synonymous with corruption and murder. She gestured to the strongbox visible on a high shelf. That's just one copy. Want to guess how many others are out there? How many witnesses have I protected? How many dead drops will trigger if certain people don't check in regularly? Pinkerton studied her for a long moment. You've changed the rules of the game, Miss Thorne. No, Emma's voice carried quiet conviction. I've just reminded everyone what the rules always were. Justice isn't negotiable. It's not for sale, and it doesn't bow to men with money and guns. The mining representative adjusted his cuffs, buying time to think. Emma could almost see the calculations behind his eyes. Losses versus gains, risks versus rewards. The consortium could be a powerful ally, he finally offered. Your skills, your reputation could be valuable to us. Like they were valuable to Montgomery. Emma shook her head. Your time is ending, Mr. Pinkerton. The frontier's changing. The days when corporations could buy law and dispense death are over. Because of one woman with a gun. Because of people who've decided to stop being afraid. Look around you. Every person in this town, every witness I've protected, every piece of evidence I've gathered, they're all part of something bigger than your consortium's greed. Pinkerton's face hardened. This isn't over. Actually, Emma smiled, it is. You have exactly 1 hour to ride out of Copper Ridge. After that, the first batch of evidence goes to the newspapers, including proof of the consortium's role in Cooper's murder. You're signing your own death warrant. No, Emma's hand dropped to her Remington. I'm giving you a chance to save what's left of your organization. 1 hour, Mr. Pinkerton. Time's wasting. After they left, Benjamin Hawkins approached. Quietly. They'll be back. With armies next time, Emma agreed. But we'll be ready. The frontier's waking up, Mr. Hawkins. People are remembering what justice really means. She touched her gun, feeling the weight of responsibility it represented. The game had changed, evolved into something larger than one woman's quest for justice. Copper Ridge had become a symbol, a beacon for others tired of living under corruption's shadow. The war was just beginning, but for the first time, Emma felt true hope. Because sometimes the most powerful force for change isn't a gun or a badge. It's the moment when good people decide to stand together and say, enough. Outside, the Arizona sun climbed higher, casting no shadows for ghosts to hide in. But then Emma Thorne didn't need shadows anymore. She had something better. A cause worth fighting for, and a town full of people ready to fight beside her. The remainder of the day brought a steady stream of visitors to Copper Ridge. Not hired guns or corporate agents, but ordinary people from neighboring towns. Ranchers who'd lost land to Montgomery's schemes. Miners cheated out of their claims. Widows whose husbands had died in accidents after refusing to sell. Emma listened to their stories from behind the bar, each tale adding another piece to the puzzle of corruption she'd been assembling for years. Benjamin Hawkins kept the whiskey flowing while Sheriff Richardson took statements, building an even stronger case against the remnants of Montgomery's empire. Miss Thorne, a weathered old miner, approached hesitantly. "Name's Jackson McAllister. They took my silver claim 2 years ago. Said the deed was invalid." "The Willow Creek mine?" Emma asked, remembering details from Cooper's files. McAllister's eyes widened. "How did you—" Marshal Cooper kept detailed records. "Your claim was legal. Montgomery's men forged documents showing you'd sold it before the strike was announced." The old miner's hands trembled. "My boy died defending that claim. Said he wouldn't let them steal what was rightfully ours." Emma reached beneath the bar, producing a folder. "These are the original deeds, along with proof of Montgomery's forgeries. Take them to Judge Harrison in Prescott. He's one of the few honest judges left. He'll help you reclaim what's yours." As McAllister clutched the documents with tears in his eyes, William Hayes appeared at Emma's elbow. "Riders on the North Road," the blacksmith reported quietly. "But different from this morning. These ones look like regular folks, words spreading about what happened here." Emma nodded. The consortium's worst nightmare, people realizing they're not alone, that they can fight back. "Makes us a target," Hayes observed. "We already were," Emma replied. "But now we're something else too, a symbol. Every person who stands up to them, every piece of evidence that comes to light, makes their power a little weaker." The saloon doors swung open again, admitting a familiar face that made Emma's hand drop instinctively to her Remington. "Easy," Catherine Wells said softly, raising empty hands. "I came to explain." The former secretary looked exhausted, her fine clothes travel-stained, but her eyes were clear and determined. "They said you'd vanished from custody." Emma kept her voice neutral. "Because I asked to," Catherine replied. "After Judge Matthews' suicide, I knew they'd come for me next. So I reached out to some friends. Friends you introduced me to," understanding dawned. "The underground." Catherine nodded. "The network of safe houses you've been building. People whose lives you've saved, whose property you've helped recover. They got me out, kept me hidden." She produced a leather portfolio and helped me retrieve something important. Inside were documents that made Emma's breath catch. Banking records, telegrams, ownership papers, not just from Arizona territory, but from all over the frontier. "The consortium's entire operation," Catherine explained. "Every corrupt deal, every stolen property, every murder disguised as an accident. I've been gathering these for years, waiting for someone strong enough to use them." Emma studied the papers with growing amazement. "This goes beyond Montgomery, beyond even Arizona territory. All the way to Washington," Catherine confirmed. "Senators, governors, railroad barons, they're all connected. The consortium isn't just a silver mining operation. It's a web of corruption stretching across the entire frontier." The implications were staggering. Emma had thought she was fighting one corrupt businessman. Instead, she'd stumbled onto something far larger, a battle for the very soul of the American West. That's why Pinkerton was really here, she realized, not just to clean up Montgomery's mess, but to assess the threat. "And to try to buy you off," Catherine added. "They're scared, Emma. For the first time, they're facing something they can't control. Not just a fighter, but someone who understands their methods, who can beat them at their own game." Hayes whistled softly. "No wonder they want you dead." "They want more than that," Emma mused, studying the documents. "They want to make an example. Show what happens to people who stand against them." She smiled grimly. "Just like we're showing people what happens when you fight back." The day wore on, more visitors arriving with stories and evidence. Emma began to see the larger pattern. How Montgomery's operations in Arizona connected to land grabs in New Mexico, to railroad schemes in Colorado, to political corruption in California. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power, about who would control the future of the frontier. As the sun began to set, Emma gathered her closest allies, Hayes, Richardson, Hawkins, and now Catherine, in the saloon's back room. "Pinkerton will be back," she told them. "Not just with hired guns, but with lawyers, bankers, corrupt officials. They'll try to break us legally before they resort to violence." "Let them come," Hayes said firmly. "Town's with you." "Not just the town anymore," Emma replied, gesturing to Catherine's documents. "This is bigger than Copper Ridge now. We're fighting for every person who's lost land to their schemes, every family broken by their greed." "What's the play?" Richardson asked. Emma's smile was dangerous. "We give them exactly what they fear most, the truth. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Every day another document surfaces, another witness speaks out, another corrupt deal exposed, death by 1,000 cuts." Catherine nodded approvingly. "More than that," Emma continued, "we show others how to fight back, share evidence, protect witnesses, build networks of resistance. The consortium's power comes from making people feel alone and helpless, so we teach them they're not." Hawkins studied her thoughtfully. "You're not just talking about justice anymore. You're talking about changing the whole frontier." "Justice is changing," Emma replied softly. "It's what happens when good people remember their own strength." Outside, the sun sank toward the horizon, painting Copper Ridge in shades of gold and promise. Inside, Emma Thorne and her allies planned a revolution, not with guns and violence, but with truth and courage and the unstoppable power of people who decided to stop being afraid. The ghost shooter had become something more than a legend. She'd become a beacon, a symbol of resistance against corruption that had seemed untouchable. And in saloons and camps across the frontier, people were beginning to whisper new stories, not just about a woman who could outshoot any man, but about a movement that was changing the very heart of the American West. The war for the frontier's soul was just beginning. But for the first time, the odds were shifting in favor of justice. The consortium's response came at dawn, but not with guns blazing. Instead, it arrived in the form of a well-dressed woman stepping down from the morning stage, her silver-streaked hair and patrician bearing marking her as distinctly out of place. "In Copper Ridge, Virginia Pinkerton," she announced to the gathered crowd, her Boston accent crisp in the morning air. "Theodore's sister. And unlike my impetuous brother, I believe in solving problems with intelligence rather than intimidation." Emma watched from the shadows of the saloon's doorway, noting the subtle details others might miss. The way Virginia's gloves were worn at the trigger finger, how her fashionable walking stick made the perfect counterweight for a hidden blade. This was no mere socialite. This was the consortium's most dangerous operative. "Miss Thorne," Virginia called out, not even bothering to search the shadows. "I believe we have matters to discuss. Shall we dispense with the theatrical elements?" Emma stepped into the light, matching Virginia's refined tone with her own Kentucky accent. "Of course, though I suspect your definition of discussion differs from mine." Astute. Virginia's smile was razor-sharp. "I've reviewed your file. Daughter of Major James Thorne, 7th Cavalry, top of your class at Miss Porter's School for Young Ladies. Quite the scandal when you disappeared after your father's murder." "Ancient history," Emma replied coolly, though her hand itched for her Remington. "Is it?" Virginia produced a leather folio. "Because I have here sworn statements from witnesses placing you at the scene of several unfortunate incidents. Enough to see you hanged in any court in the territory." Emma's laugh was genuine. "Manufactured evidence? That's hardly original. Oh, these are quite real. Your techniques are distinctive, my dear. The shots through gun hands, the calling cards left at each scene, All very dramatic, very traceable. The morning crowd had grown, and townspeople gathered to witness the confrontation. Emma could feel their tension, their worry that this elegant woman might succeed where brute force had failed. "You've built quite the narrative here," Virginia continued, pacing like a professor delivering a lecture. The noble vigilante, fighting corruption with surgical precision. But what happens when people learn the truth, that the ghost shooter is really a murderer wanted in 3 states? "Interesting theory," Emma replied. "But theories require proof." Virginia's smile widened. "Like the proof currently being presented to Judge Harrison in Prescott, the same judge you sent poor Mr. McAllister to. By now, he's probably signing warrants for your arrest." Emma felt the first real flicker of concern. Harrison was one of the few honest judges left, if the consortium had manufactured evidence convincing enough to fool him. "You see," Virginia continued, clearly relishing the moment, "while my brother tried to break you with force, I've been dismantling your support structure piece by piece. Every witness you've protected, every ally you've cultivated, they're all about to learn that they've been helping a wanted killer." She gestured to a rider approaching at full gallop. "That would be the official warrants now. Shall we see how quickly your supporters abandon you?" But Emma had been playing this game far too long to fall for such obvious manipulation. "Interesting timing," she mused. "These revelations are surfacing just as Catherine Wells's evidence starts circulating among newspaper editors." For the first time, Virginia's composure cracked slightly. "I'm not sure what you mean." "No?" Emma smiled. "Then let me explain something about mathematics, Miss Pinkerton, specifically the mathematics of information." She turned to address the growing crowd. "Yesterday, copies of the consortium's private records began arriving at newspapers across the frontier. Not just evidence of corruption, but proof of how they manufacture false charges against their enemies. Proof exactly like what's in that rider's saddlebags." Virginia's eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Emma nodded to William Hayes, who produced a copy of the morning's Prescott Gazette. The headline read, "Corporate Conspiracy Exposed: How the Western Silver Consortium Frames Its Enemies." "You see," Emma continued, enjoying the way Virginia's perfect composure began to crack, "while you were busy crafting your false charges, we were exposing your methods. Every judge, every newspaper editor, every law enforcement official in 3 territories now knows exactly how the consortium operates." She gestured to the approaching rider. "So by all means, show us these warrants. Let's examine them publicly, compare them to the evidence we've already published about your tactics. I'm sure the good people of Copper Ridge would be very interested in the similarities." Virginia's face had gone pale. "You couldn't have known that you'd try to discredit me legally. It's what I would have done. The consortium's gotten sloppy, Miss Pinkerton. You're still playing the old game, using the old methods, but the frontier's changing. People aren't afraid anymore." As if to prove her point, Catherine Wells emerged from the crowd, carrying her own set of documents. "Looking for these, Virginia, the original templates you used to forge evidence, the ones I stole from your brother's safe before I disappeared." The approaching rider had reached the edge of town, but instead of charging in with warrants, he pulled up short. Even from a distance, Emma could read the uncertainty in his posture. "Your man seems confused," she observed. "Perhaps he's just read today's paper. Or maybe he's wondering why Judge Harrison sent riders to every town in the territory last night, warning about fraudulent warrants being circulated in his name." Virginia's composure shattered completely. "This isn't possible. We controlled every variable." "Except one," Emma replied softly. "You forgot the truth. Once released, can't be contained. Every person you've wronged, every life you've destroyed, they're all finding their voices now, and mathematics is against you. How many lies does it take to outweigh a single truth? The Morning sun had climbed higher, eliminating the last shadows in Copper Ridge's main street. Virginia Pinkerton stood exposed in its harsh light, her carefully crafted scheme unraveling thread by thread. "The consortium will not accept this," she declared, but her voice had lost its authority. "The consortium doesn't have a choice," Emma countered. "Right now, similar scenes are playing out in towns across the frontier. Your evidence discredited, your methods exposed, your power breaking against the simple force of truth." She stepped closer, dropping her voice. "You tried to paint me as a killer, Miss Pinkerton, but we both know the real killers are the ones who murder with paperwork and false charges, the ones who destroy lives with forged documents and corrupted courts." The crowd had grown larger, more confident. Emma could feel the shift in their energy, not just anger now, but determination, the recognition that they were witnessing not just a confrontation between two women, but the beginning of real change. "This isn't over," Virginia managed, but the threat sounded hollow. "No," Emma agreed, "it's just beginning. The frontier's waking up, Miss Pinkerton. The days of corporate emperors playing games with people's lives are ending. You can either adapt to that reality or be swept away by it." As Virginia Pinkerton retreated to the waiting stage, Emma turned to address the gathered townspeople, not with a speech or a call to arms, but with a simple truth that had been growing stronger with each passing day. "This is what justice looks like," she said quietly. "Not just bullets and badges, but people standing together, choosing truth over fear. The consortium thought they could break us by attacking my reputation. Instead, they've just proven what we've been saying all along, that their power depends on lies, and lies cannot stand in the light of day." The morning stage departed, carrying Virginia Pinkerton and her failed scheme away from Copper Ridge. But Emma knew this was just one battle in a larger war. The consortium would try again, with new tactics and new weapons. But something fundamental had changed. The frontier was no longer a place where corporate power could operate unopposed in the shadows. A new force had awakened. The power of ordinary people who had decided to stop being afraid, and at its heart stood Emma Thorne, no longer just a skilled shooter hiding behind a saloon girl's facade, but a symbol of something larger, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful weapon against corruption isn't a gun or a badge, but the simple, unstoppable force of truth. But the morning's victory came with its own price. As the crowd dispersed, Catherine Wells approached Emma with fresh intelligence gathered from her network of informants. "Virginia's arrival wasn't just about discrediting you," she reported quietly. "It was a distraction while we were focused. Kia consortium agents were moving against our allies in other towns." Emma's expression hardened. "How bad?" 3 safe houses were compromised. 2 witness families were forced to flee. And Catherine hesitated. "They found Judge Harrison's weakness. His daughter in San Francisco." Emma nodded grimly. "I was wondering what they held over him." "They're adapting," William Hayes observed, joining them, "learning from each defeat." Emma led them into Hawkins' saloon, where maps covered one wall, marking the spread of both consortium influence and resistance activity across the territories. Red pins showed confirmed corrupt officials, blue marked allies, and black indicated fallen friends. "Virginia's attack was clever," Emma mused, studying the patterns. "She knew she couldn't break us with false charges. The real goal was to make our allies question themselves, wonder if they've backed the wrong side." "It's working in some places," Catherine admitted. "The Stevenson family in Prescott, they were going to testify about land theft. Now they're having second thoughts." "Can't blame them," Hayes said softly. "After what happened to Judge Matthews." Emma's hand went to her. Remington, a habit born of thought rather than threat. The consortium's changing tactics. They've realized brute force just makes martyrs. Now they're attacking the one thing we can't protect with guns or evidence: people's faith. So, what's our counter? Benjamin Hawkins asked, emerging from his back room with a fresh pot of coffee. We use their own strategy against them, Emma replied. Virginia showed us their new playbook: doubt, fear, uncertainty, so we turn it back on them. She moved to the map, starting to place new pins. Every corrupt official they control, every bought lawman, every compromised judge, they're all starting to wonder if they backed the wrong side, wonder if they'll be exposed next. Wonder if their partners will sacrifice them to save themselves. Catherine's eyes lit with understanding. Like Judge Matthews. Exactly. The consortium killed him to silence him, but his death speaks louder than his life ever did. Every one of their allies is now wondering if they'll be next. Emma began drawing lines between pins, showing connections and vulnerabilities. We don't just expose corruption anymore. We show their people that no one is safe, that the consortium will sacrifice anyone to protect itself. Turning their fear tactics against them, Hayes nodded approvingly. But we offer something else. Two, Emma continued, a way out. For every corrupt official who comes clean, every bought lawman who turns evidence, we show mercy. Create a wave of defections that the consortium can't stop. She turned to Catherine. That's why Virginia was really here, not just to discredit us, but to shore up their support. They're terrified of their own people turning against them. The strategy took shape as they talked. Emma had learned long ago that the best way to fight an enemy like the consortium was to make them defeat themselves. Every act of intimidation would be turned into proof of their desperation. Every attempt to silence witnesses would become evidence of their guilt. There's more, Catherine added, producing a telegram. Our friends in Sacramento intercepted some interesting communications. The consortium isn't just worried about their operations here, they're concerned about their investors. Back east, Emma smiled. The mathematics of fear. Every investor reading about corruption and murder starts questioning their investment. Every banker handling their accounts starts wondering about liability. They're trying to contain the damage, Hayes observed, but they can't shoot every newspaper editor, threaten every telegraph operator, silence every witness. No, Emma agreed. They can't, and that's their real weakness. The consortium's power was built on isolation, making each victim feel alone, making each town think it was fighting alone. But we've broken that isolation. She gestured to the map, where blue pins now outnumbered red in many areas. Every person who stands up gives others courage. Every corrupt official who turns evidence encourages others to do the same. It's not just mathematics anymore. It's a change in the very nature of power. Outside, the sun had climbed to its zenith, casting no shadows for corruption to hide in. Inside, Emma and her allies continued planning, turning the consortium's weapons of fear and doubt back against them. Virginia will report this failure, Catherine predicted. They'll try something new. Let them, Emma replied, checking Remington out of habit. The old methods don't work anymore. The frontier's changing, becoming something they can't control with money or threats. She studied the map one final time, seeing not just pins and lines, but the human stories behind each marker. Every blue pin represented people finding their courage. Every black pin marked a sacrifice that wouldn't be forgotten. The consortium thinks in terms of power, she said softly, but they've forgotten what real power is. It's not about who has the most guns or money. It's about who has the most truth. Hayes nodded toward the saloon's windows, where townspeople could be seen going about their business with new confidence. And who has the most heart? Emma smiled, remembering how far they'd come from the days when she'd hidden her skills behind a saloon girl's facade. The ghost shooter had become something more than a legend now. She'd become a catalyst for change that was spreading across the frontier like dawn breaking over mountains. The war was far from over. The consortium would strike again with new tactics and new weapons. but they were fighting yesterday's battles, using yesterday's methods. The frontier had awakened to a new kind of power, the power of people who had stopped being afraid, and at its heart stood Copper Ridge, no longer just another dusty town, but a beacon of resistance that was changing the very soul of the American West. One truth, one witness, one act of courage at a time. The blow came from an unexpected direction. 1 week after Virginia Pinkerton's failed attempt to discredit the resistance, Emma was checking supply shipments at Copper Ridge's general store when she noticed something odd about the latest telegraph from their allies in Prescott. "Mr. Reynolds." She called to the telegraph operator. "Who sent this message?" The elderly operator adjusted his spectacles. "Came through regular channels, Miss Thorne. Signed by Catherine Wells herself." Emma's fingers traced the paper, feeling indentations that shouldn't be there. "When, exactly?" "Middle of the night. Thought it was strange, but figured with all that's happening." "Catherine Wells is left-handed," Emma cut him off softly. "The pressure marks on this paper are from a right-handed writer." The implications hit like a thunderbolt. Emma was already moving, her Remington clearing leather as she burst out of the telegraph office. "Hayes," she shouted, "check the safe houses now!" But she already knew they'd be empty. The signs had been there. Subtle changes in communication patterns, slight discrepancies in reports, the gradual redirection of witnesses and evidence to safer locations. Catherine Wells, their master of intelligence and coordination, had been compromised. "How long?" Sheriff Richardson demanded when they gathered in Hawkins' saloon an hour later. "At least 3 days," Emma replied, studying the map wall where blue pins now represented uncertain allies. "Maybe longer. She's been feeding information to the consortium, helping them dismantle our network piece by piece." "Can't be willing," Hayes argued, "after everything she risked." "Everyone has a pressure point," Emma said grimly. "The consortium's gotten better at finding them. Question is, what game are they really playing?" The answer arrived with the evening stage, a letter addressed to Emma in Catherine's elegant hand. "My dear friend," it began, "by now you've discovered my apparent betrayal. But like all things in this war, the truth is more complex than it appears. The consortium didn't break me. They tried something far more dangerous. They offered to make me their agent of change from within." Emma read on, her expression growing darker. "They're evolving again. Instead of fighting us directly, they're trying to corrupt the resistance itself, turn our methods against us, use our own network to rebuild their power structure." "Smart," Hayes admitted. "Can't fight an enemy that becomes part of you." Emma paced the saloon, mind racing. Catherine's letter continued, describing how the consortium had approached her with evidence of corruption within the resistance itself. Minor at first, allies skimming money, witnesses selling information, supporters using their position for personal gain. "They showed me proof," Catherine wrote, "that some of our own people are becoming what we fought against. Power corrupts, Emma, even power born of good intentions. The consortium offered me a chance to clean house from within, to ensure the resistance remains true to its principles." "She's not wrong," Richardson said quietly. "We've seen it happening. The more influence we gain, the more opportunity for abuse." Emma's hand tightened on her Remington. "So we become our own enemies? Let the consortium corrupt us through our own success?" But there was more. Catherine's letter revealed an elaborate plan. The consortium wasn't just trying to corrupt the resistance, they were trying to replace it. Create a new power structure that appears to fight corruption while actually controlling it. They're offering legitimacy, Emma realized, a way for corrupt officials to pretend to reform while maintaining their power. And they're using our own people to do it. The implications were staggering. The consortium had learned from its defeats, adapting like a virus to become more subtle, more insidious. They couldn't beat the resistance through force or fear, so they would consume it from within, Miss Thorne! Young Tommy, the stable boy, burst into the saloon. Riders coming! Least 30 men, all wearing badges. Emma moved to the window, studying the approaching force. U.S. Marshals, she observed. Real ones, not imitations. The consortium's new game pieces. They can't touch us, Hayes protested. We haven't broken any laws, haven't we? Emma's smile was grim. Think about it. In fighting corruption, how many legal lines have we crossed? How many technical violations in the service of justice? Catherine would have documented everything, every questionable action, every bent rule. She turned to her allies. The consortium's not trying to destroy us anymore. They're trying to legitimize us, control us through official channels, make us part of their system. So what's the play? Richardson asked. Emma's mind raced, seeing the pattern behind the consortium's new strategy. They had realized that legends couldn't be killed by bullets or discredited by lies. So they would do something far more deadly. They would make the legend official, controlled, part of the very system it fought against. Get word to our people, she ordered. Everyone who's still loyal. Tell them to go dark, trust no one until they hear from me directly. The ghost shooter's about to disappear again. Running? Hayes asked, surprised. Hunting, Emma corrected. The consortium thinks they can corrupt our cause by making it legitimate? Fine! Let them try to control a ghost. She moved quickly, gathering only essential supplies. Catherine's betrayal isn't just about her. They'll have others placed throughout our network. People who think they're reforming the system from within, when they're really being used to control it. How do we fight that? Richardson demanded. How do we fight an enemy that turns our own allies against us? Emma checked her Remington one final time. By remembering what we really are. The resistance wasn't built on badges or authority. It was built on truth, on justice that answers to no one's rules but its own. The marshals were nearly at the edge of town. Emma could see Catherine Wells riding with them, along with other familiar faces, allies who thought they were helping to legitimize the fight against corruption. They're not just coming to arrest us, Emma explained. They're coming to offer us positions, authority, and a chance to fight corruption legally, and every person who accepts becomes part of their new system of control. She turned to Hayes and Richardson. Let them come. Let them think they've won. Let them believe they can turn our resistance into their tool. While you do what? Hayes asked. Emma's smile was dangerous. While I remind everyone what real justice looks like. The ghost shooter didn't become a legend by wearing a badge. Sometimes the only way to fight corruption is from the shadows. She slipped out the back of the saloon, just as the marshals entered. The town proper. By the time they reached Hawkins' saloon, they would find only empty rooms and cooling coffee cups. But in the shadows, Emma Thorne was already planning her next move. The consortium thought they could tame justice by making it official. They were about to learn that some forces can't be controlled. Some legends can't be contained by badges or laws. The war for the frontier's soul had entered a new phase. No longer a simple battle between corruption and justice, but a complex dance of legitimacy and shadow, of official power and underground truth. And somewhere in that darkness, a ghost was watching, waiting to remind everyone that real justice answers to no one's authority but its own. Emma moved through the shadows of Copper Ridge's back alleys, her mind racing as fast as her feet. She wasn't just evading capture. She was reading signs others might miss. The way the marshals spread out through town spoke of careful planning. The presence of certain faces among them told a deeper story. Clever, she whispered, recognizing James McPherson, once a corrupt judge she'd exposed, now apparently working with the marshals. Very clever indeed. She slipped into the abandoned Anderson place, where she'd established one of several fallback positions months ago. Inside, she found Benjamin Hawkins waiting. Didn't think you'd actually run, the old barkeep said, passing her a package of supplies. Running would be exactly what they want, Emma replied, checking the contents. Make me look guilty. Justify. Owed their takeover. No, this is about something else. She spread out a series of documents, copies of Catherine's intelligence reports, carefully annotated with her own observations. Look at the pattern, she instructed. Every major figure they've turned to their side. Judge McPherson, Deputy Collins from Prescott, even Catherine. All people who had authority or influence in the resistance. They're building something, Hawkins realized. A new power structure, Emma confirmed, but with a twist. Instead of fighting corruption from the outside, they're creating a system that appears to fight it from within. Controlled opposition. She pointed to specific reports. See these pardons, corrupt officials who saw the light and joined the reform movement. But look closer. They kept their positions, their influence. They just answer to new masters now. Hawkins studied the documents. So when Catherine says she's working to reform the system from within, she's actually helping them build a more sophisticated form of control, one that wears a badge of legitimacy. The sound of horses passing made them both freeze. Through a crack in the boards, Emma watched more familiar faces riding with the marshals, resistance members who thought they were finally getting official support for their cause. They're offering everything we fought for, she mused. Official. Authority to fight corruption, legitimate power to make changes. It's brilliant, really. Instead of trying to destroy the resistance, they're trying to become it. How many will see through it? Not enough, Emma admitted, because they're not entirely wrong. Some of our people have abused their position. Some have become corrupt themselves. Catherine's evidence about that is real. She checked her Remington, more from habit than necessity. The consortium's offering a seductive bargain. Trade absolute justice for regulated authority. Fight corruption within the system instead of against it. And that's bad because Emma's smile was sad. Because the system is corrupt. All they're really offering is a chance to control the flow of justice, to decide which crimes get punished and which get pardoned. They're not trying to end corruption. They're trying to manage it. A commotion from the street drew their attention. The marshals were gathering witnesses, taking statements about the resistance's activities. But Emma noticed how certain names were never mentioned, certain crimes carefully omitted. See, she pointed out, they're building their case selectively. The small-time corrupt officials get exposed and punished, making the system look legitimate. But the real power players, the ones controlling everything, they become the new guardians of justice. So what's our move? Emma's expression hardened. We show people the difference between real justice and managed justice. Every time they pardon a corrupt official who joins their cause, we expose three. More they're protecting. Every time they celebrate a managed victory over minor corruption, we reveal the bigger crimes they're hiding. She began gathering specific documents, creating packages of evidence. They want to play shadow games. Fine. Let's show them what a real ghost can do. They'll call you a criminal, Hawkins warned. Say you're opposing legitimate authority. Good, Emma replied, because that's the real lesson people need to learn. Sometimes justice has to work outside the law because the law itself has become corrupt. The ghost shooter was never about authority. It was about truth. She finished packing, then handed Hawkins a series of letters. Get these to our most trusted allies, the ones who remember why we started fighting in the first place. Tell them to watch for my signal. What signal? They'll know it when they see it. The consortium thinks they can tame justice by making it official. They're about to learn that some forces can't be controlled, some truths can't be managed. Through the window they could see Catherine Wells speaking to a gathered crowd, her words carrying clearly. The time for outlaws and vigilantes is over. True justice comes through legitimate authority. Emma's laugh was soft but dangerous. They've forgotten something important. You can't negotiate with a ghost, you can't control a legend, and you can't regulate the truth. She moved to leave, then paused. One more thing. When the time comes, remember, the biggest crimes aren't the ones done in darkness. They're the ones done in broad daylight with official approval. As she slipped away into the growing dusk, Emma Thorne felt a strange sense of liberation. The consortium had tried to kill her with violence, discredit her with lies, and now they were trying to control her with legitimacy. But in doing so, they'd revealed their greatest weakness. They still thought in terms of power and control, of authority and regulation. They didn't understand that real justice wasn't about who had the right to enforce it. It was about the simple, unstoppable force of truth. And somewhere in the gathering darkness, a ghost was preparing to remind them of that fact. One exposed crime, one revealed lie, one undeniable truth at a time. The war for the frontier soul had indeed entered a new phase, but this time, the battlefield wouldn't be in the streets or the courtrooms. It would be in the shadows, between official truth and actual justice, between managed authority and absolute right. And in those shadows, the ghost shooter was about to become more dangerous than ever, because now she had nothing left to lose, and everything to prove. 3 days after Emma Thorne disappeared from Copper Ridge, the first cracks appeared in the consortium's new facade of legitimacy. It began with a simple notice posted on the door of the Territorial Bank in Prescott, announcing an audit of all recent property transfers. Routine procedure, the bank president assured worried investors. But his hands shook as he read the official order, signed by 3 federal judges whose integrity even the consortium couldn't question. The same morning, newspaper editors across the territory received anonymous packages. Each contained documented proof of how reformed corrupt officials were still serving their old masters, just wearing new badges. In Sacramento, a respected businessman opened his mail to find proof that his partners were using his legitimate mining operations to launder money for the consortium. By sunset, he was in the district attorney's office turning evidence. "It's her," Catherine Wells told the gathered marshals back in Copper Ridge. "This is how she operates, not just exposing corruption, but making it impossible to hide." "She's one woman," Marshal James Burke objected. "She can't be everywhere at once." But he was wrong. The ghost shooter had become something more than a single vigilante. She had become a shadow in the machine, a wrench in the gears of managed justice. In the week that followed, 2 more reformed officials confessed to ongoing corruption. 3 major banks initiated internal investigations, and a dozen witnesses, previously silenced by threats, found their courage. Emma watched it all from the shadows, moving between safe houses established long ago for exactly this purpose. But she wasn't just hiding, she was weaving a web of her own, using the consortium's new tactics against them. "They made a fundamental mistake," she explained to William Hayes during a midnight meeting in an abandoned mineshaft. "In trying to legitimize their control, they had to create official records. Every pardon, every deal, every reformed criminal they embraced, it all left a paper trail." Hayes nodded, understanding. "And you're following those trails." "Better than that," Emma smiled. "I'm using their own network against them. Every time they form a corrupt official, they have to trust that person with inside information. And not everyone is as loyal as Catherine." She produced a leather folio. "These came from Judge McPherson's own files. Seems his reformation was less complete than they thought. He's been keeping insurance, documentation of everything they asked him to do after his pardon. Insurance that found its way to you?" "Amazing what guilty men will trade for a chance at real redemption," Emma replied. "The consortium's biggest weakness isn't their corruption. It's their belief that everyone can be bought or controlled." But the true masterstroke came a week later, when Emma's agents simultaneously exposed 20 legitimate businesses across 3 territories, all secretly owned by the consortium through their reformed allies. "This is what managed justice looks like," her notes to newspaper editors read. "Criminal enterprises given legitimate faces, corrupt men given badges and authority. They haven't stopped the corruption, they've just licensed it." The effect was devastating. The consortium's carefully constructed facade began to crack as investors withdrew, partners turned evidence, and the public realized that the new reform movement was just another face of the old corruption. "Find her!" Catherine Wells ordered, her own position increasingly precarious as more of her reformed allies were exposed. She has to have help, supporters, a network of her own. But Emma had learned from her enemies. Like a ghost, she left. No trail, no pattern, no predictable movements. Her supporters communicated through codes hidden in legitimate business transactions, passed messages through children's games, and used the consortium's own postal network to distribute evidence. "You taught me well, Catherine," she whispered, watching her former friend coordinate search efforts from the shadows of a Prescott alley. "You showed me all the ways a network can be compromised, so I built one that can't be." The game changed. Again, when Emma struck at the heart of the consortium's new strategy. Anonymous letters arrived at every major newspaper office, detailing exactly how the reform program worked, how corrupt officials were offered pardons in exchange for becoming controlled opposition, how legitimate authority was used to manage, which crimes were exposed and which were protected. "They're not ending corruption," her letters explained. "They're franchising it, creating a system where justice is regulated, controlled, and most importantly, profitable." The public reaction was immediate and fierce. Citizens who had cautiously supported the official reform movement now saw it for what it was: a more sophisticated form of control. But Emma's true victory came in the form of doubt. Every reformed official, every legitimized business, every pardoned criminal began to wonder, were they really part of a reform movement, or just pawns in a larger game of controlled corruption? "The thing about managed justice," Emma explained to Benjamin Hawkins during another midnight meeting, "is that it requires trust. Everyone in the system has to believe they're part of something legitimate. Once that trust cracks—" She gestured to the growing stack of newspapers, each headline announcing another exposed scheme, another corrupted reform, another betrayal of public trust. "They're eating themselves alive," Hawkins observed. "Because they can't tell friend from foe anymore," Emma agreed. "Every partner might be working with me. Every reformed ally might be gathering evidence. They created a system based on controlled betrayal, and now they're drowning in real ones." The consortium's response was predictable but futile. They increased security, tightened controls, and demanded more loyalty oaths. But each new restriction, each attempted purge, only drove more of their reformed allies to seek real redemption. "You can't control a conscience once it's awakened," Emma noted, watching another former corrupt official turn state's evidence. "You can't manage justice once people remember what the real thing looks like." But her greatest victory came unexpectedly, in the form of a letter from Catherine Wells herself. Delivered through a complex series of dead drops, it contained a single line: "You were right. Real justice can't be managed. Help me make it right." Emma studied the letter for a long time, remembering her friend's betrayal, weighing the possibility of another trap. But something in the words rang true, the recognition that some forces can't be controlled, some truths can't be regulated. "Send a message," she instructed Hayes. "Tell Catherine that real redemption isn't granted by authority, it's earned through actions." The war for the frontier's soul had entered yet another phase. But this time, the battlefield wasn't between corruption and justice, or even between legitimate authority and vigilante action. It was in the hearts of those who had to choose between managed reform and real change, between controlled justice and absolute truth. And in that battle, the ghost shooter had become more than a legend. She had become a reminder that some choices can't be regulated, some rights can't be managed, and some wrongs can't be pardoned. They can only be made right through direct, uncompromising action. The consortium had tried to tame justice by making it legitimate. Instead, they had only proven why true justice must sometimes work outside the law, because sometimes the law itself becomes a tool of corruption. Emma's new network operated unlike anything the consortium could track. She'd learned from their attempts to infiltrate the resistance, creating something more fluid, more adaptable. The key, she explained to a small group of trusted allies gathered in an abandoned silver mine, is that no one knows more than they absolutely need to, not even me. She laid out a map marked with seemingly random locations, general stores, saloons, stables, even children's playgrounds. Every location is a potential message drop, she continued, but the messages move randomly, passed by people who don't even know they're passing them. A child's game of marbles might determine which route information takes. A pattern of laundry on a line could signal whether a route is compromised. William Hayes studied the system with growing appreciation. They can't infiltrate what they can't find, can't corrupt what they can't understand. Exactly. The consortium thinks in terms of hierarchies of control. They can't grasp a network that operates on chaos and coincidence. But Emma's masterstroke went beyond mere communication. She had turned the consortium's own legitimacy against them, using their need for official records to trap them in their own lies. Every time they reform a corrupt official, she pointed, they have to document it. Every pardon, every deal, every legitimate business front, it all requires paperwork. And paperwork leaves trails. She produced a series of documents, each seemingly innocent on its own. Bank records showing legitimate transactions, property deeds with proper stamps, business licenses with all the right signatures. But when you connect them, the pattern emerged like a spider's web. Each legitimate transaction hiding darker purposes, each official document concealing unofficial deals. They're so focused on maintaining appearances, Emma mused, that they've forgotten the power of simple truth. They can explain away one corrupt official and justify one suspicious deal. But when the pattern emerges, her allies saw it now, how each exposed corruption forced the consortium to explain, to justify, to maintain their facade of legitimacy, and each explanation created new records, new documents, new trails to follow. But that's not the real beauty of it, Emma continued, her eyes gleaming. The real weapon is doubt. Every time we expose one of their reformed allies, every other corrupt official starts wondering, are they next? Are they being set up as sacrificial lambs? Can they trust their own partners? She gestured to recent newspapers, each headline, announcing another betrayal, another exposure, another crack in the consortium's carefully managed system. They're facing a choice now, Hayes observed. Either abandon their pretense of legitimacy or become so tangled in their own lies that they strangle themselves, Emma finished. Either way, their system of managed justice falls apart. But the true depth of Emma's strategy became clear when a letter arrived from an unexpected source, Judge Harrison, one of the few truly honest officials in the territory. My dear Ghost, it read, I begin to see the genius of your approach. By forcing them to maintain a facade of legitimacy, you have made them play by rules they cannot truly follow. Each attempt to appear lawful only highlights their underlying corruption. Emma smiled, reading the judge's words. He understands. The consortium's greatest weakness isn't their corruption. It's their need to hide it behind respectability. She turned to her allies. That's why Catherine's letter might be genuine. She's smart enough to see the same pattern, to realize that managed justice isn't justice at all. It's just corruption wearing a badge. Can we trust her? Hayes asked. Trust, "Isn't the point," Emma replied. "If she's genuine, she becomes a powerful ally. If she's trying to trap us, she still serves our purpose, showing how their system corrupts even those who think they can reform it from within." The next phase of her plan was already in motion. Across the territory, small discrepancies in official records were being discovered. Innocent questions were being asked about legitimate business dealings. Honest officials were starting to notice patterns they couldn't ignore. "The beautiful part," Emma explained, "is that we don't have to prove everything. We just have to raise enough questions that they have to keep explaining, keep justifying, keep maintaining their facade of legitimacy." She pointed to the map, where markers showed the spread of their influence. Every explanation they give, every justification they make, every attempt to maintain their respectability, it all creates new records, new documents, new evidence to follow. "And the more they try to control the situation," Hayes began, "the more it slips through their fingers," Emma finished. "Because you can't control truth with managed lies. You can't regulate justice with official corruption." The war had indeed entered a new phase, but it was one the consortium wasn't equipped to fight. They understood power, control, authority, but they didn't understand the simple, unstoppable force of truth revealed. As night fell over the territory, Emma Thorne watched from the shadows as her web of revelation spread. The ghost shooter had become more than a legend, more than a vigilante, more than even a symbol of resistance. She had become a reminder that true justice can't be managed, can't be regulated, can't be controlled. It can only be served pure and uncompromising in the light of absolute truth, and in that truth, the consortium's carefully constructed world of managed corruption was about to shatter. Not with gunfire or violence, but with the simple, devastating power of undeniable fact. The consortium's desperate gambit came at midnight, not with guns or warrants, but with a single telegram delivered to every newspaper office in the territory. Ghost shooter identity revealed, Emma Thorne's tragic past exposed. Emma read the notice posted outside the Prescott Telegraph office with a mixture of amusement and respect. "Finally," she murmured, "they're learning to fight with truth instead of lies." The story they published was surprisingly accurate. Her father's murder, her education at Miss Porter's, her transformation from society daughter to frontier legend, all laid out in careful detail, supported by documentary evidence. "Bold move," William Hayes commented, joining her in the shadows. "Using truth as a weapon." "Not just the truth," Emma replied, studying the newspaper's fine print. "Look who wrote it." The byline read, "By Catherine Wells, former Resistance Intelligence Chief." It's an invitation, Emma realized. She's not just exposing my past. She's showing she knows how to play this new game. The article itself was masterfully crafted, neither condemning nor praising, simply presenting facts in a way that demanded public attention. But between the lines, Emma read a deeper message. "Notice the details she chooses to include," she pointed. "Out to Hayes. My father's investigation into corruption in the 7th Cavalry, the mysterious fire that destroyed the evidence, the accident that killed him just before he could testify." Hayes nodded slowly. "She's not just telling your story. She's connecting it to the present, showing how the same patterns of corruption have been operating for years, turning my personal history into evidence against the very system she supposedly serves." But Catherine's gambit had wider implications. By exposing Emma's identity so publicly, she'd forced both sides into the open. The consortium could no longer pretend they were chasing a mysterious vigilante. They had to explain why they were hunting a woman whose only crime was seeking justice for her murdered father. Emma's response came the next morning, in the form of a letter delivered to every major newspaper in the territory. Dear Catherine, you've chosen to share my truth. Allow me to share yours. Enclosed are documents detailing your own journey, from idealistic young secretary discovering corruption in the Western Silver Consortium, to resistance fighter seeking justice, to apparent collaborator trying to reform the system from within. But I'm also including something you didn't know I had. Proof that the same men who ordered my father's death were behind the attempt on your family 10 years ago. The fire that killed your parents wasn't an accident. It was punishment for your father's refusal to falsify mining surveys. You see, old friend, we're not so different. We've both learned that corruption doesn't just steal property or buy influence. It destroys lives, breaks families, murders good people who dare to stand against it. You thought you could change the system from within. I understand that dream. But as you've helped expose my past, let me show you our future. The consortium isn't reforming. It's not becoming legitimate. It's simply evolving, finding new ways to commit old crimes. And every person they reform, every official they pardon, every criminal they legitimize becomes part of that evolution. You've made my truth public. Now I'm making all the truth public. No more shadows, no more managed justice, no more controlled opposition. Let the people decide who's really fighting for justice. Your friend in truth, Emma Thorne. The impact was seismic. Catherine's article and Emma's response didn't just expose individual stories. They revealed the deeper pattern of generational corruption that had shaped the frontier. Check the telegraph office, Emma instructed Hayes. Within hours, we'll start getting messages from others who recognize the pattern. Children of murdered honest men, families destroyed for standing against corruption, a whole generation of victims connecting their personal tragedies to the larger truth. She was right. The stories poured in, ranchers, miners, merchants, all recognizing their own losses in the tale of two women fighting corruption from opposite sides. But Catherine wasn't finished. Her next move was both brilliant and desperate. She called for a public meeting in Copper Ridge, inviting Emma to come debate the future of frontier justice in front of the very people they both claimed to serve. It's a trap, Hayes warned. Of course it is, Emma agreed, but not the kind they think. Catherine's not trying to capture me, she's trying to force both sides to speak their truth in public. The day of the meeting dawned clear and cold. Copper Ridge's main street, filled with people from across the territory, came to witness what many were calling the conscience of the frontier facing its own reflection. Emma arrived as she always had dayed, like a ghost stepping out of shadow into sudden, sharp reality. She wore no disguise now, no pretense of being anything other than what she was, a woman who had chosen justice over safety, truth over comfort. Catherine waited on the steps of the town hall, similarly transformed. Gone was the careful mask of the reformed collaborator. She stood as Emma remembered her from the early days of resistance, fierce, principled, unafraid. "Welcome home," Catherine said simply. "Been home all along," Emma replied. "Just took some of us longer to see it." The crowd fell silent as these two legends of frontier justice faced each other. But what followed wasn't the confrontation many expected. Instead, it became something far more powerful, a public reckoning with truth itself. "Tell them," Emma challenged softly. "Tell them what really happens when justice becomes managed, when truth becomes regulated, when right and wrong become matters of official policy." Catherine's response would change the frontier forever. Standing before the gathered crowd, she pulled out a badge, her official symbol of authority in the consortium's new order. "I believed in this," she began, her voice carrying across the silent street. "Believed we could fight corruption with its own tools, change the system from within. I was wrong." She let the badge fall in the dust. 2 months ago, I helped create a new department of investigation, Officially, we were tasked with rooting out corruption. In reality, we were given lists, not of criminals to arrest, but of crimes to ignore, corrupt officials to protect because they were useful, witnesses to silence because they knew too much. The crowd stirred, but Catherine wasn't finished. I told myself it was progress, that by managing which corruptions were exposed, we could gradually reform the system. Instead, I became part of something worse than the obvious corruption we used to fight. I became part of making corruption legitimate. Emma watched her friend's confession with a mixture of pride and sorrow. This was more than she'd hoped for. Not just an admission of error, but a revelation of the deeper truth she'd been fighting to expose. Yesterday, Catherine continued, I received new orders. A list of 20 reformed officials who needed to be protected, their crimes hidden, their positions secured. Among them was the man who ordered the death of my parents, the same man who arranged Major Thorne's murder. She produced a document, held it high for all to see. This is what managed justice looks like. This is what happens when we let corruption wear a badge of authority. We don't end the evil, we just make it official. The crowd's reaction was electric. Many of them had accepted the consortium's new face of legitimate authority. Now they were seeing behind that mask, understanding how their hope for reform had been twisted into a tool of control. But that's not the worst of it. Catherine's voice hardened. Show them, Emma. Show them what we found in the restricted files. Emma stepped forward, producing her own set of documents. These are transfer orders signed by the highest levels of territorial government. Plans to expand the consortium's reform program across the entire frontier, not just pardoning corrupt officials, but giving them authority to decide which corruptions get investigated and which get ignored. She began reading names, dates, and details. With each revelation, the crowd's understanding deepened. This wasn't just about individual crimes or personal vendettas. It was about the systematic legitimization of corruption itself. They offered me a position, Catherine admitted. Chief of Internal Affairs for the entire territory, said I could help guide the reforms and decide which corruption to address first. Made it sound noble, necessary, called it managed progress. Her laugh was bitter. That's when I finally understood what Emma had been fighting all along. The greatest threat isn't obvious corruption. It's corruption that wears the face of legitimacy. Corruption that calls itself reform and makes good. People complicit in evil. The silence that followed was profound. In that moment, the gathered crowd understood that they were witnessing more than a confession or a revelation. They were seeing the birth of a new kind of resistance. So what now? Someone called out. How do we fight corruption that's become legal? Emma stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with Catherine, the same way we always have, with truth, not managed truth, not regulated truth, but absolute, uncompromising truth. But they have authority now, another voice objected. Badges, courts, official power. They have paper and promises, Emma corrected. We have something stronger. We have proof. Proof of every crime they've hidden, every witness they've silenced, every corrupt official they've protected. And now, thanks to Catherine, we have proof of how their entire system of managed justice really works. Catherine produced more documents. These are copies of every order I received, every list of crimes to ignore, every instruction about which corruption to hide. I've sent duplicates to every newspaper editor and honest judge in the territory. But more importantly, Emma added, we have something they can't fight. We have truth that can't be managed. Every person here has seen corruption touch their lives. Every family has felt its effects. That's not something that can be regulated or controlled. It can only be faced and fought. The sun had climbed higher, casting no shadows for secrets. To hide in its harsh light, the choice facing the frontier became clear. accept a system of managed corruption wearing the mask of reform, or stand with those who believed in absolute justice. "I made my choice," Catherine declared. "I choose to stand with the ghost who never stopped fighting for real justice." One by one, other badges began falling in the dust. Deputies who had accepted positions in the new order, officials who had believed in reform, each one choosing truth over authority, justice over legitimacy. But Emma knew this was just the beginning. The consortium's system of managed corruption wouldn't fall in a single day. It would take time, courage, and something more powerful than any badge or warrant. It would take an unwavering commitment to absolute truth. "The real fight starts now," she told the crowd, "not with guns or laws, but with something stronger. The simple, unstoppable power of truth that can't be managed, justice that can't be controlled, and right that can't be made wrong just because someone with authority says so." The war for the frontier's soul had entered its final phase. But this time, the battlefield wasn't between lawmen and outlaws, or even between corruption and justice. It was between those who believed truth could be managed and those who knew it had to remain absolute. And in that battle, two women who had fought from opposite sides now stood together, ready to show the frontier what real justice looked like. Not wearing a badge of authority, but carrying the unstoppable power of uncompromising truth. The consortium's reaction to Catherine's public revelation came not with violence, but with something far more dangerous: silence. For 3 days after the meeting in Copper Ridge, their entire network went quiet. No orders, no movements, no response to the growing wave of exposures and confessions. "They're planning something," Emma told her gathered allies in Hawkins' saloon. "This kind of quiet only comes before a storm." She was right. On the 4th day, Theodore Pinkerton himself arrived in Copper Ridge, but not with gunmen or threats. Instead, he brought lawyers, accountants, and a proposition that showed just how desperate the consortium had become. "Miss Thorne, Miss Wells," he addressed them formally in the crowded saloon, "the consortium would like to offer you positions on our newly formed Ethics Review Board, full authority to investigate corruption, complete autonomy in your decisions." Emma's laugh held no humor. "Still trying to manage justice, Mr. Pinkerton? Still thinking you can control truth with titles and authority?" But Pinkerton wasn't finished. "We're prepared to admit certain things. Mistakes were made. Certain officials overstepped their bounds. The consortium is willing to submit to genuine reform under your oversight." "Interesting choice of words," Catherine observed. "Willing to submit. As if justice needs your permission, as if the truth requires your approval." "Be reasonable," Pinkerton pressed. "You've won significant concessions. The consortium acknowledges the need for change. We're offering you the power to implement that change directly." Emma moved through the crowded saloon, noting faces both familiar and new. Every person present had come to witness this moment, to see if the legend of the ghost shooter would end with compromise or conviction. "You still don't understand," she said quietly. "This isn't about power or position. It's about something you can't control, can't manage, can't regulate." "And what's that?" "The simple fact that right is right and wrong is wrong, no matter what. Authority says otherwise." She turned to address the crowd. "The consortium isn't offering reform. They're offering to let us help them manage corruption, to make us part of the system that decides which crimes get punished and which get ignored." Catherine stepped forward. "I played that game, Mr. Pinkerton, thought I could use the system's own tools to fix it, but you can't fight corruption by becoming part of it, even if you wear a badge that says Ethics Board." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.